Realms of Ruin is releasing in just a few days, and that means I can now tell you if it's worth picking up and what I think of the game. So let's waste no more time and just dive straight in. So the game is split up into 3 main sections. You've got the story campaign, Conquest mode, and then skirmishes versus other players or AI. You do also have the creative tools like map making and army painting, but I think for the most part players are going to spend the majority of time on the first 3, so how are they? First up, the campaign. This is clearly one of the main selling points of the game, and honestly, it's pretty plain to see why. Gameplay aside, you have fully voice-acted cutscenes with pretty decent animation and of course great representations of iconic Age of Sigmar units and characters. This isn't strictly campaign mode, but the game looks beautiful. It's not necessarily the most realistic looking game or has the highest or most intense graphics you've ever seen, but every unit and ability looks great, and zooming in to see combat more closely is always fun, even if it does almost always result in you falling behind. Anyway, the story here is good enough for a game like this. You know, I'm not super duper lore guy, but I enjoyed the narrative, taking me through missions and justifying objectives and progression. As for the actual gameplay, the first few missions do a great job of teaching you the basics of the game, and over time you get closer and closer to playing full-blown skirmish battles to prepare you for Conquest and multiplayer. I do wish that there were more unique objectives here, similar to the defense against Lord Glome fairly early on into the campaign. Skirmishes are all there is in Conquest and multiplayer, so the campaign was really the time to shine with unique different objectives and some variety. There's still loads to do here with side objectives, challenges, and 4 fairly intense difficulty levels. You could easily get a ton of time out of this campaign if you want to get to 100%. And if you're totally new to the genre, like I said, it's a great way of introducing you and preparing you for everything else. Aside from that in the story, there's not a ton there. So yeah, it plays decently and the story is good enough. I don't want to spoil anything here, so that's all I'll say for today. The Conquest mode, however, is the game mode I was the most excited for once I learned it was going to be in the game, and sadly it's probably the area of the game that I'm most disappointed by. Now let me say up front that disappointment is more of a result of me getting my hopes up too high rather than the game over-promising and under-delivering. When I heard Conquest mode, I thought of something like Star Wars Empire at War, where you play through a campaign where each faction starts in control of a single planet and moves through the map, taking more enemy territory, building up planets to unlock better units, and eventually wiping out the other factions. What I got was something similar to Planetary Annihilation, another disappointing game, where you pretty much just move through the map from start to end and you have pretty much the exact same power level throughout. There's no progression outside of the random modifiers on certain battles, but even these are pretty minor since most of the time it changes to max population, damage, or resource income. It's still the same basic formula, but with some numbers changed. And speaking of the same formula, at least as far as I've played, every single battle is just a skirmish. Now yes, it's different maps, but they are functionally the exact same battles every single time. You start with your base, expand out, upgrade your tech, get better units, capture victory points, and hold them until you win. It's that exact same thing over and over and over again. It's pretty sad that the campaign mode has some unique mission objectives like the early chain removal mission or the Lord Glome defense that didn't make it across for some variety. I just talked about how the further you go the more campaign turns into skirmish missions, and the choice to have Conquest be nothing but skirmish again really confuses me. Just adding a handful of mission types would have made this game would feel so much more replayable, because as it stands I can play like 2 battles in a row before I'm kind of getting bored of doing the same thing over and over again. And I probably should mention, you're playing as the same faction in every single one of these battles. Now if you play multiple, the different factions do help and the modifiers are okay, but it's just not enough. I can see myself maybe loading this up if I want to do some mindless battling whilst watching something on another screen. But aside from that, it's not a massive draw if you're looking for more single player content. If you're looking to pick up a faction and want a series of skirmishes as them and some challenging modifiers, then by all means take them for a spin. But the replay value outside of that is pretty limited. Now, all of this being said, while I can't see the devs adding a whole ass system like Empire at War overnight, or even ever, I could totally see them adding some mission variety by pulling inspiration from the campaign mode. These are the same devs that from the first playtest to the second totally reworked the control scheme because we all told them that it wasn't great. Hopefully they'll take this feedback on board and come back with something a little more special at some point in the future, but for now, this is what we have. And the final main game mode is basically just the Conquest mode, but no modifiers. Possibly online and a little more tweakable settings-wise. You all know what skirmishes are, I'm sure. Set up battles versus AI on any map you want, playing as or against any faction you want, etc, etc. I'm also going to take this section to talk about the different factions and how they feel to play. All in all, I'm relatively happy with them. I've said in early videos that each of them feel very similar, so you won't struggle to jump between them, and that's still true at launch. It's only really when you get later into the game that things start to get a little more different depending on your faction. And on the whole, while the gameplay is more or less the same, the armies I ended up with were pretty different depending on who I was playing as. Now I know that sounds obvious since they all have different units, but I mean the ranged focus from Stormcast isn't there for the Nighthaunt, so you have to focus a little more on melee and flanking, which I do appreciate. Coming from something like Warhammer 3 where each faction factions so drastically different, I was a little bit worried that each faction would feel too samey here, but no, definitely when you get into the later tiers, they do feel quite a bit different. The research tree abilities is where they really stand apart from each other the most. Final form, some of these units are unrecognizable from their base form, and the abilities they can unlock fit great with the look and feel of the factions as well as their playstyles. Now balance wise, I said it during the final test preview, and I'm saying it again now, Siege are still far too strong, and by Siege, I mean horrors. They can beat pretty much anything outside of heroes in the early game, and even if they do lose, they take down a ton of your units with them if they're in melee, making them a pain in the ass to fight at all times. Their Infernal Gateway Changer of the Ways ability is also insanely overpowered, especially when you compare it to other factions' endgame unit abilities. Everyone else feels just about the same, but if you play as Siege, it is just way too strong early on, and it only gets crazier the further into the game you go. Just look at the skirmishes I did for my guide. I had to play Siege twice because I won too fast to showcase endgame units, and I wasn't trying any harder than I was with any of the other factions. I really hope they figure out how to balance them better before the multiplayer gets up and running, otherwise I fear it's going to be a play Siege or lose, because none of the other factions counter them or reach their insane heights quite as easily. Speaking of the multiplayer, that is the other component of this skirmish game mode, and honestly, I've hardly touched it in this version since it's just more skirmishes but versus other players. I get the feeling they're really hoping that this multiplayer takes off and carries the player count moving forward, and while I'm certainly not the authority on what multiplayer strategy gaming scene enjoys, I just can't see it doing crazy numbers. It's just the same battles over and over again with one of 4 factions versus one of 4 factions. That's only 16 possible combinations in 1v1. I could be wrong, and I'd very happily be because I know the devs poured a ton of work into this game, but I feel like without any replayable single player content, the game could fall into the classic multiplayer trap of not many players, so long queue times, so less players, etc, until there's no one left. At the moment, we've got no word on if DLC is even in the plans moving forward, but if a proper in-depth Conquest campaign mode got announced, I'd feel a lot more optimistic moving forward. And lastly, we should probably talk about the creative tools. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time here since this stuff is probably the area of the game that the least amount of people are going to actually use. That said, it's a really cool feature that I personally enjoy, and I wish other strategy Warhammer-based games would also have, wink wink. The Army Painter is the simplest part, lets you change the colours of nearly every part of every unit on either an entire faction-wide basis or individual units. It can be a lot of fun making an army of pink Stormcast or green Fat Cloud Nighthorn. The fact that you can take them into any game mode outside of campaign is also really fun and lets you stand apart from your enemies, even if you happen to be playing the same faction. The map maker I've probably had less time with because I'm a dummy and map making is one of those things that I could just never really do well. It just ends up being a big flat plain with maybe a big lake in the middle or something. The tools here though are super strong and really let you make whatever you want and fine tune everything down to the weather and position of the sun. And while I'm not really a map maker and upload my creations online, the photo mode inside of this map maker is a feature I absolutely adore. It might be because I make videos, but the ability to set up units, choose their animations down to the frame, move lighting around to get every other detail just the way you want it, to get the perfect picture, well that is just about the coolest thing since sliced bread for me. If Total War had this feature, I'd take about 6 weeks to make a single video, because I'd just be setting up my perfect diorama days on end to get the best thumbnail picture possible. Like I said, it's a very niche feature and literally only exists so you can take pretty pictures. But goddamn, you can take some bangers, and I absolutely love this. This entire set of creative tools is a very niche thing that I can probably see 90% of players never even touching, but I think they're amazing additions and show that the dev team really care and wanted to share as much as they can with the players. I have been begging for something like this for Total War, publicly and privately, for years, and we will likely never get it. Meanwhile, Frontier just drop it on launch, the absolute mad lads. So yeah, very niche, but very cool if you're into this sort of thing. And that does kind of bring us to closing arguments and what score I'm going to give this game. I feel a little bit conflicted really because I can see that the devs poured passion into this game by the gallon. The models look beautiful, the game runs pretty damn well, and believe it or not, that is a selling point in modern gaming. The cutscenes are well animated and voiced, the gameplay is quick and intense, and those creative tools are things that they could have easily left out, but they added them anyway. And it pains me that they did all this, and yet the overwhelming feeling I get about the game is it relies on the same skirmish game mode just a little bit too much. I think they're banking on the multiplayer scene taking off, and I'm not qualified enough to know if it will. I know if it doesn't, then there isn't really a lot else here to do. Don't get me wrong, you can easily get your money's worth out of this game with the content that's here now. But will you be playing this for months after, or will you just finish the campaign, maybe do a single conquest and move on? Because that's honestly how I'm feeling. Again, it could just be because I'm not into multiplayer, but we'll have to wait and see. I really wish that Conquest game mode had more variety and things to do, as I could then see myself coming back to play this more and more. As it stands, this will likely get shelved once I've gone through, complete the campaign, and learnt all I can about the 4 factions. So, with all that being said, I'm going to give Realms of Ruin a 7 out of 10. I'll come back to it for any big updates, but for now, it's good. It's just not great. And that worries me in a year of pretty great games overall. But that's all from me. Let me know your thoughts on the game in the comments below once you get your hands on it later this week. Like, subscribe, and if you want more Realms of Ruin content, then check out this video here to see my complete beginner's guide.